This is Piles and Pile Driving Equipment by myself, Caden Benedict. So, to outline it, we'll be going over the introduction, the purpose, the mechanics of pile drivers, methods, types of pile drivers, life applications, common problems, safety, summary, and then resources used for the presentation. So to start it off, a pile driver is simply a piece of equipment that is used to drive piles into foundation in order to strengthen the foundation for the structure. The pile is what is being driven into the ground for foundational purposes. Piles can be made from numerous types of materials. In construction, you will generally see these piles made from concrete. With this information, our goal is to take a look at how pile driving equipment affects the construction industry. The purpose. The most important thing on any construction site will always be the foundation. Without a strong and durable foundation, there is virtually no point in what is being built above. All across the nation are vastly different soil types that are going to be native to that land, and pile drivers are needed in order to strengthen the foundation of these places with difficult soil properties. The length and distance of these piles into the ground will depend on how far down the stable soil will lie. For most all multi-story buildings, you will need a deep foundation that is performed driving piles into this soil. These piles are also placed to provide safe structure of the building even through ground shifting and any movement. The mechanics of pile drivers. For the mechanics of pile drivers, we will look at the diesel hammer. The hammer itself on this piece of equipment will act as a large engine that is fueled by the injection of diesel fuel. A crane arm will hoist this weight into the air as it will act as a large piston. This method of hoisting allows for the air to compact and work with the fuel that is being injected into the equipment. Once this happens, the hammer will begin to raise and continuously drop a specified weight onto the pile in order to drive it in certain depth into the soil. Pile driving methods. Pile driving methods will mostly depend on the type and strength of the soil that is needing to be driven into. The most common method is impact driving, which was described when we went over the mechanics of the diesel hammer. Another method will be the pressing or jacking hammer, which will create a more rapid motion of driving versus the more spaced out, methodical method of the diesel hammer. Another very popular form of pile driving is through vibro driving, which reduces a lot of the force needed for the previous two methods. It'll be an oscillating driver that's located at the top of the pile to induce vibrations, and these vibrations are able to reduce the friction between the pile and the soil, therefore putting it into the soil through the vibration. Looking at types of equipment, pictured here is an impact hammer, as we discussed in the pile driving methods. This large machine will create pressure and pound the pile into the ground. This pile will later be used to support the foundation of anything they decide to build on top. And here on the right is another form of pile driving equipment, and it is the vibratory hammer. This will have a large piston suspending this piece, and instead of driving it into the soil, it will vibrate and break up the sand surrounding the pile. Which piece of pile driving equipment you will use will depend on the soil type in the area. And pictured here is a pressing or jacking hammer, and this hammer represents a way to keep things more silent with versus the loudness of an impact driver. It's operating by jacking the piles into the ground using the surrounding piles for reaction. Then here we'll be looking at the cost, and to the right you see pictured a pile driver being sold for upwards of $300,000. Quality pile drivers can cost anywhere from 200 to 600,000, quite a wide range depending on how nice you want to go. Buying these pieces of equipment is a big investment to make. These companies must be sure they have a steady flow of work in order to see return on the investment if you choose to buy one of these. Renting is also an option, and those prices can be found on the internet. Just put in your company information, and they get back to you with a quote, depending on how long your time of use is for this equipment. And then looking at a real life application, shown to the left is a hospital that was built in Scandinavia. In the northern regions, mountains can cause the land to be very unstable. Um, the freezing and the permafrost can cause the land to be very unstable at times. And by supporting these structures through the use of piles, the structures are able to remain stable even through the unstable and just differing conditions that are seen here. And as a test your knowledge question, you are a contractor that is located on the coast and your bid was chosen to construct a small building in a sandy terrain. What kind of pile driver could best be used to drive piles into the natural soil? A. Pressing jacking hammer. B. An impact hammer. C. A vibratory hammer. And here it is C, a vibratory hammer. In this case, the quick vibrations of the hammer would move the fine-grained sands quickly to the side. This ultimately will lead to the most efficient way to drive your piles into the soil. Next, we'll look at some common problems found. A lot of the problems that arise in this field have to do with the type of soil that you're going to be dealing with. Before equipment is brought on, the soil is studied to determine the amount of blows that is needed to drive the pile into the proper depth. Oftentimes, a pile driver on hand cannot exceed a certain amount of repetitive blows, while the soil may actually call for it. So it is up to whoever is tasked with this to understand how many blows will be needed to reach the soil depth trying to be attained and making sure that your piece of equipment can handle that. When piling, it isn't uncommon for the required blows to go up or down while using the equipment, and to combat this, the team will have to take samples using the boring method during the process. You want to be sure the pile is not driven too far into the soil. You also want to be sure you are driving the pile with the correct amount of force. And then regarding safety, pile driving, like anything on the job site, can be very dangerous if not treated with proper attention. Like any site, it is required to use a hard hat, and in this case, it is definitely imperative that you wear ear equipment, especially with the loud impacts that can be found with the diesel hammer. Pile cushions are needed for the impact hammers as they will need to be checked and replaced about every 1400 blows. The cushion will generally be about 8 inches in thickness when first replaced, and it will need to be removed if it gets anywhere below 5.5 inches in width. Along with the cushions, the pile driver / auger will need to be inspected for any cracks or loose members like screws, bolts, anything of that nature. With so much force being driven into the piles, it is important everything is in place to ensure the safety of the workers using this equipment. To summarize, through the presentation, we have reviewed everything from the purpose to the methods to the safety and the use of piles and pile driving equipment. The purpose of this method could not be overstated as the planet is flooded with different terrains and soil types. The use of these drivers piles can be put into place to combat the ever-changing and shifting soil that you could find yourself working with. It is always important to understand the soil you're working with, especially when you're trying to keep a crew of people safe throughout this process. And here are the references used for the project. Thank you.